Hey, welcome back to our study called Steadfast Love, and we're in Genesis chapter 24. Today we're looking at verses 1 through 9, and today's lesson is called Faith in Providence. So let's begin where Abraham was old. Abraham's old now. The story starts off with that reminder that Abraham was old and advanced in years. He was in his hundreds now, and for us, we would say, yeah, that's obvious, you know. Thank you, Moses, for explaining that to us, that he's old. He's over 100 years old. To us, that is old. But remember that Shem, Noah's son, died 25 years before Abraham. When was he old and well advanced in years? When he was, 500? 550? You know, when was Shem old, advanced in years? After the flood, people aged a lot more quickly. The only patriarch that had a shorter life than Abraham was his brother Nahor, who dies at 148. So the toll of sin upon humanity has quickly robbed us of hundreds of years. And so you have Shem dying at 600 and Abraham being old in his hundreds. Not 200, not 300, not 400. You know, he's old just past 100. So you see that shift there. You see that quick decline after the flood of people's ages. Now, even though Abraham is advanced in age and God had blessed him in all things, he hasn't outgrown his need to trust God yet. You know, he's never outgrown that. He still has to trust God. He's never come to a place where he doesn't have to trust God. The command of God for Abraham to walk blamelessly before him has not diminished at all. There was no retirement from his service to the Lord. You know, you don't see him, I spent all those years serving God and now I'm just going to kind of coast in. Nope. No, there's no coasting in for God's people. God continues to demand that Abraham place his trust in him and act accordingly. And Abraham does. We see this. Because the first thing we see is that in this story here, that Isaac needs a wife. So we get that description of who Abraham is. And again, an old man now. Going to remind us that he's old. And now we're going to see that he needs to find a wife for Isaac. And so he, several years have passed. Isaac's older now. He's in his 30s probably. And he's ready to take a wife. So Abraham calls his servant to him and gives him the task of going out and retrieving a woman for Isaac. Abraham puts the servant under a solemn oath not to get a Canaanite woman. But what is this strange ritual of placing his hand under the thigh, quote unquote, ritual that we have here of Abraham asking the servant to, why is Abraham asking his servant to place his hand under his thigh? Seems a little, a little private. Actually, I think the Hebrew is a little more intimate than just putting your hand under his thigh. So it's why is he doing this? Well, I think it reinforces the gravity of the task and the oath that the servant is being put under. Abraham's not just giving suggestions to the servant, but he's putting him under this covenant. He's placing this continuation of the covenant of God and the covenant of circumcision that God gave to Abraham. He's putting that upon the servant's shoulders. So this isn't the last time, that we see this kind of ritual of placing the hand under the thigh. Because as Jacob is dying, he makes Joseph take an oath in the same way concerning his burial. He says, I don't want to be buried in Egypt here. You got to bury me in Canaan, so with my fathers. So he says, you got to take my body back to Canaan. And he makes Joseph swear by putting his hand under his thigh. So again, that idea of the covenant is being passed on, that you are swearing to do this. You have to do this. This is how important this is. You can't mess around with this. And that's why I think it's such an intimate kind of oath. You're leaning in, you're placing your hand where it really shouldn't be. And, it has that kind of connection, I think, with circumcision, A lot of the commentators make that connection that it has to do with that part of that swearing of doing this because the covenant of God is relying upon you doing this. That's how important this was. But it's a very intimate kind of oath, and one that makes you realize the gravity of the situation. So it's very important that the servant follows through on what Abraham says. Now, the question comes to mind: why is Abraham so concerned about who Isaac marries? Why shouldn't he just marry a Canaanite? I mean, he's living there. There's probably lots of women there. Why not just choose one of him or one of them? Why not? Well, let me remind you of Genesis chapter 9 and the cursing of Canaan there. Remember that Abraham is in the line of Shem. Canaan was cursed by God to be a servant of his brothers, and specifically Shem. Abraham will not see the promised child marry a cursed woman. I mean, they're under a curse. These people of Canaan are not, they have to be the servants of Shem. Can't be equal. They can't gain the inheritance of it. So that's what I think that's where he's going with that. Plus, in Genesis chapter 15, God tells Abraham that the descendants of Canaan will be removed from the land, and that will occur when the sin of the Amorites, a clan of the Canaanites, is complete. So these are good reasons for Abraham to keep Isaac from these women. They're idolatrous, they're pagans, they worship a false god. There's another reason. So all these things kind of mixed together really makes Abraham, why would Abraham want Shem or Isaac to marry someone who's not in their family? That doesn't make any sense. It's setting up for trouble. It's mixing of those who are cursed and those who have been blessed. So all that doesn't make any sense. So that's why Abraham does that. Now we get to the servant's question here in verse 5. We see what the response of the servant is to this taking of the oath. So not willing to be very hasty here, and he doesn't do the oath right away. He asks a question. Before he swears, he asks, what happens if I can't bring a woman back? Say I go to Mesopotamia and I go to where your family lives, and none of the women want to come back with me. What happens then? Do I take Isaac back to Mesopotamia? Abraham says, don't take the son back there. He's not allowed to go back. The promise is for the land of Canaan, not Mesopotamia. If he goes back there, he may not return. So he needs to stay here. You should never go back to Mesopotamia. We're not going back there. We're not going backwards. We're going forwards. But Abraham then displays his faith in the work and providence of God, because he basically tells the servant not to worry about it, because God will send his angel before him and we'll have it all worked out anyway. But he also says, well, if it doesn't work out, then don't take Isaac back. But basically, don't worry about it. He's saying, you'll be released from the oath if she doesn't want to come back. But the angel of the Lord's going before you, so, she's coming. You don't really have to worry. As J.C. Ryle says, there's no such thing as chance or luck or accident in the Christian journey throughout this world. All is arranged and appointed by God. And all things are working together for the believer's good. It's basically what Abraham's thinking. He's like, the angel of the Lord's going before you, servant. You don't have to worry about it. Just go. Just go and it'll work out. God's got this. Don't have to worry about it. You're not making this happen. God will make it happen. But in the rare chance that it doesn't work out and that's God's plan and I'm wrong, then, you're free. You don't have to worry about it. You're freed from the oath. So I'm sure that sets the servant's mind at ease, but also sets the servant's mind on the providence of God. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section when we look at verses 10 through 27.